I want you to consider the cylinder right here. And this cylinder being sort of descriptive of our lives. That this cylinder ultimately is a picture of what it looks like when we're born. When we're born, we come in, and I know we're conceived in sin, but the reality is we're an empty vessel. As you navigate through life and as you go through life, typically you begin to absorb so many negative things about yourself that causes so much of our confusion. It starts when we're in our adolescence. It starts what happens in the schoolyard and things said to you and labels earned you and what people did to you. It starts when we're young, and as you go through school, middle school, it's a jockeying for popularity and winning people's approval, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. There's positives and negatives. And then there's the environment that we're raised in. Some are healthy, some aren't, but some are dysfunctional and hurtful, harmful, toxic. Before you know it, you're starting to develop all these ill feelings and misunderstood identities and confusion, and this is life. And then you work through school and go through relationships that end poorly, and you feel certain ways about yourself, and then there's earned reputations, there's mistakes made, there's hurts that you've caused because you've been hurt, and in you now is all these different perspectives and all these different feelings and all these different identities. We're chock full. We're a sum total of the choices that we make, the environments that we're raised in, things that are said about us. And before you know it, what happens is that we're filled with all these feelings, and then you meet Jesus. But this is you. This is you. And you come in, and you want it to be more positives than negatives, but sometimes it doesn't work that way. And so we're filled with what people said you are, who people said whose you are, all the myriad of opinions about where you should go and what you should do and what you're called to. We're filled with all these, and then something happens where the hound of heaven comes looking for you. He comes looking for you and all your mess and all your confusion and all your misplaced identity. He finds you. He ravishes your soul. He grafts you into his family. He calls you by name. And your journey of faith begins. And the pathway of purity that leads to the promised land of blessing takes shape. The Apostle Paul then writes, and he says, okay, now that you've been blood bought, now that you've been grafted into the kingdom, and now you know whose you are. He says this in Ephesians 5, be very careful then how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity. Why? Because the days are evil. He said, be calculated. He'll use the word be circumspect. Know what's going on around you. Be wise about who you let rub against you. Consider the relationships that are close to you. Be very wise, making the most of every opportunity, not just every day, moment by moment. Be calculated and consider. Why? Because the days that you live in are evil. And there's people that want to control you and manipulate you. And Paul goes on to say, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. And do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. What Paul said is he said, now that you're going through life, he said, you got to be eyes wide open. You got to be calculated, and you got to be considerate of the relationships that you're engaged in and the people that you're doing life with. And he said, don't be foolish. He says, and don't be drunk with wine. Not that I have anything against wine, but understand this. What he's saying is don't be immersed, don't be filled, don't be controlled by it. Because he's using it as a contrast to say, but if you're going to be controlled by anything, be filled with the Spirit. And then Paul said, you'll be mindful of whose you are and what you're called to do. And so what happens is that we then come into the church and we hear this, and man, it's revolutionizing to us, and we're like, amen. So we get a little church in us, and we start coming, and oh man, this is good. Sermon speaks to us, a little genre of music changes, get into a little small group. Oh yes. And man, I mean, things start taking shape. God starts pouring into you, and you start developing a little prayer time with him, and you start hearing him speak to you. Develop a little Bible reading plan, and man, it starts shaping you. And oh man, life becomes new to you, and what you never thought could be begins to be. And oh, before you know it, the old perspectives that you had, they're not as strong as they once were, and oh, you find yourself in a new day. And this is you, and this is you, and you're feeling like, yeah, okay, I'm doing it, but you still got some anxiety within you. Still got some identity confusion within you. You got some Jesus. Yeah, you got some Jesus, but you still got these old labels that you struggle with. You still got the opinions of others who said whose you were and what you were called to. And see, unfortunately, let me just speak honest, some of us, we stop right here. This is where we stop. Thinking I got a little Jesus in me, got a little church. All right, I'll listen to a little 95.1 Shine FM. I'm good. But you're always feeling like maybe there's something more. Maybe I can go deeper. Maybe I shouldn't struggle with the anxiety that I have to the degree that I do. Maybe I shouldn't have so much fear. And maybe I shouldn't have so much doubt. And I want to tell you the reason that we struggle with this to the degree that we do many times is because you just haven't been filled enough. That you got satisfied with too little. That yeah, you come to church, and 2 years ago you were part of a small group and you're thinking about doing Love Weekend, but you're still not completely satisfied, and you're still being controlled by others. And you know what Jesus would say? You're just not filled enough. You just need to be connected to the vine once again. And you need to go all in. And you need to pursue me like you pursue everything else, because when you do, he says, I'm going to fill you from the inside out. And the old labels and the old confusion, the old way of life and the old fears, they're going to come to the top, and they're going to push everything else out until you are renewed and filled with me. So don't let other people control you. And don't let those who don't love you nearly as much as I do manipulate you. And don't live for the audience of many, but for the audience of one. Why? Because that's where life is found. And then it's not to say that still people don't try to label you. And still people don't try to control you. But when they do, it has no way to stick, because you're filled with the power of God. Be filled with the Spirit. Be filled with the God that loves you, that's called you, that blood bought you, and that has a future and a hope for you. This is how we thwart being controlled and manipulated by others. And this is how we walk through life in relationships that are life-giving and liberated and free. Jesus said, for freedom I've come to set you free. Amen.